everybody. Today, I am so honored and grateful to welcome Lesléa Newman as the guest for this month's author interview. Lesléa is an esteemed author, poet, and advocate of the LGBTQ plus community. In her nearly 40-year career, Lesléa has published more than 85 books for people of all ages and backgrounds. Her works are incredibly well awarded. Just a few of these many awards include 2 Stonewall Honors from the American Library Association, 2 National Jewish Book Awards, and 9 Lambda Literary Award finalists. In addition to being an author, Lesléa is a renowned advocate and guest lecturer. She has been a guest lecturer at Harvard and Yale, and she is currently a faculty mentor at Spalding University. In 1989, Lesléa published Heather Has Two Mommies, the first children's book to ever portray a lesbian couple positively. This book was a groundbreaking moment for queer representation and acceptance all around the world. Its inspiring nature continues to be reinforced as it makes it onto more and more banned book lists. Over the last 4 decades, Lesléa has used her writing to be a nonstop advocate for the queer community. Most recently, Lesléa authored Always Matt, a tribute to Matthew Shepard. This book is a heartfelt and poignant memoir to Matt's legacy and his life. We are incredibly proud to call it the Matthew's Place Book of the Month. Lesléa, thank you so much for joining me today for this interview, and I'm so excited to get to know you and your book better. Before we start, is there anything else you'd like to mention?
No, that was a fabulous introduction. Thank you for that.
Yeah, great. All right, then I think the first question I have for you is, how was Always Matt imagined? Did the Shepherds reach out to you, or how did that process begin?
Actually, Jason Marsden, who was at that time the executive director of the Matthew Shepard Foundation, asked me to write a picture book about Matt, a book for very young readers. And, you know, that was a challenge. And I took it on. It took me like a decade to figure out how to do it. And then when I came up with the text, my editor said, I love this. I want to do it, but it's not a picture book. And he called it more a family book, meaning for readers 14 and up, though I imagine that some younger readers might read it like maybe, 12 or 13. But it's a book for families to sit down with and look through and discuss and hopefully be inspired to take action in Matt's memory.
For sure. Yeah. That's wonderful. I didn't even know that it had begun as a children's book, but it's wonderful that it's keyed towards a generation that's younger than people who were not alive when this tragedy happened. So then my follow-up to that is, how did you decide that Jason Collins should write the foreword?
I knew right away that I wanted Jason Collins to write the foreword. I remember when his essay came out in Sports Illustrated and how he spoke about the way that he chose the number 98 in honor of Matt to wear on his jersey, but didn't tell anyone for a long time. So, as he said, he was hiding in plain sight. So I felt like he had such a strong connection to Matt that he would be the perfect person to do the introduction, and he did a magnificent job.
Yeah, he did, for sure. That's wonderful. What challenges did you have to overcome while writing Always Matt?
Well, the hardest part really was figuring out how to talk about what had happened to him. In my previous book, October Morning, A Song for Matthew Shepard, I really spend a lot of time on the page at the fence. And I didn't want to do that here, especially because it was for younger readers. So, what I came up with was just using the phrase, after they hurt him, so that any young reader could fill in what they're emotionally ready to handle. But that took me a long time to figure out how to do that without sugarcoating it, but also without being too graphic for young readers who might not be able to handle that.
Yeah, for sure. I think you did a very wonderful job of that. And it is a challenge to be able to speak to that generation about what happened in a way that doesn't, I don't want to say doesn't scare them, but doesn't scare them,
Yeah.
And then, so this is sort of a follow-up to that question, but how did you balance Matt's life and his legacy in this book, those two sort of things? Because he obviously has a wonderful legacy that has changed so much, but he was a person too. And so how did you wrote a lot about who he was, and how did you balance those two things?
So that was really my goal was, so many people know him as a headline, as a tragedy, as a martyr, as a victim, as a hero, all those things. And what I really wanted to do was get beneath all that and drive home the point that he was a person.
Yeah.
Right. So he had likes and dislikes. He had dreams. There were people in his life who he loved and who loved him. And I really wanted to humanize him. So that's why I spent a lot of time talking about his life. And then he has had such a huge impact on the world that I wanted to continue where that left off and show what an impact he has had and continues to have. So, I mean, I haven't really calculated it, but I think the book might be almost half and half.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense to me as well. And that's, I know, something that we're always striving to do at the foundation is to remind people that he was a person, and not just a headline. And so it's wonderful that you're able to do that in your book as well. Can you, this, somewhat relates to what you talked about before with writing that after they hurt him, but can you talk about how you managed to convey such a sense of hope? Because this is a book that has so many a story that has so many raw and sometimes painful emotions in it, but after reading Always Matt, you walk away with with motivation and hope for the future. So how were you able to convey that?
Well, I'm so glad to hear that, because that was definitely my intent. Especially when I write for young people, I always try to leave them with hope, which doesn't mean compromising the truth. But it's just important to not leave a reader devastated. So highlighting the things that so many people have done in Matt's name, Michelle Houseway with her film, Matt Shepard is a friend of mine, Moises Kaufman, of course, with the Laramie Project, his parents with the foundation, the angels who stood in their beautiful angel costumes to protest the protesters at Matt's funeral, at the trials. It was just important for me to show that no matter who you are, no matter what your circumstance is, you can do something to make the world a better place. And from what I hear, that's what Matt would have wanted.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's something that we work on a lot at Matthew's Place. If somebody writes a piece about activism, oftentimes have to go back and say, it is important to talk about the hard parts of life, but we want to end on a note of this is what you can do to help, and not just something that's negative. We want to remind people that they can do things. They have concrete things they can do to make the world a better place. And then that will help them too.
Right.
So yeah, for sure. Your prose in Always Matt, because I want to talk a little bit about your prose and your poetry, for sure. So your prose in Always Matt is really artfully concise, and I often found myself needing to stop and contemplate pages that only had a few words on them. And from the other people I've talked to, I know that that's something that everybody's experienced. They're there was maybe one sentence on the page, but I would read it and I would be like, oh my gosh, I need to think about just this one sentence. So can you talk about the process of accomplishing that?
So the text is really a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what helped me when I was struggling with the writing. And, I wrote so many drafts, over 25 drafts. And when I finally realized, I'm a poet first and foremost, and I could make this text into a poem, that is what got me through. And so, it was really important for me to make the text really sparse, because Matt left such a big hole in the world. And so I wanted to hold that space physically on the page.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's something that I did consciously. And also it just felt to use some poetic techniques, there's repetition, there's alliteration. So wide Wyoming sky, that's alliteration, and it's repeated throughout the book. It just made me think about rhythm and just a way to carry the reader through the pages in a slow, quiet way. It's not a book to rush through by any means, right? And I'm glad that you talked about how you would pause and look at each page, because that was definitely my intent. And Brian's artwork really helps with that, because his work is so beautiful that you just want to linger there.
Yeah, for sure. This isn't on our list, I hope it's all right, but did you always imagine yourself becoming a poet? Or did you start out as an author and want to become a poet later? Which way did those go? I mean, you're both.
Poetry definitely is first. Poetry is my first love. I've been writing poetry since I was 8 years old.
Oh.
And I studied poetry with I had wonderful mentors, most specifically Allen Ginsberg. who I studied with in Boulder, Colorado at Naropa Institute, which is now Naropa University. And so everything I write, whether it's in prose or poetry, comes from a poetic eye.
Mhm.
So that's where I always begin.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm sure that ties into writing children's books and family books as well, because those often have poetic repetition and those sort of themes to them. Yeah. I very much hope to take a class in poetry here when I'm at DePaul. I've always loved it. It's not my main thing, but I've always loved to sort of dabble in it and to write a little bit of it. And I think it's a great skill for anybody to have, to be able to speak in a way that is artful beyond just writing.
I think everybody should be reading and writing poetry for sure.
For sure, absolutely, yes. So what was it like to work with an illustrator? You mentioned that his drawings really helped like slow down the novel and create that sense. And so like what was it like to work with him?
So, there's a real misconception about the world of children's books and family books. We don't really work with the illustrator in the way that one might think. So I handed the text over to my editor. We went over it, we revised it, and then my editor worked with the illustrator along with the art director, and I pretty much stayed out of it, except that I had so much source material because of my previous book and this book that I asked my editor if I could send Brian my images so that he didn't have to do all the research on his own, starting from scratch, because I had done so much of it. So I was able to provide him with imagery. And then I saw his sketches, and then I gave feedback, and then I saw almost finished work, and I had the chance to give more feedback, and then the book was ready to go.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like what do you think that it's like editing poetry? I'm sure you edit your own work as well, but like as when I edit poetry on Matthew's Place, it's very different for me than editing an article, because there are things that I that are very intentional that somebody may do that in an article I would be like, no. we need to have good grammar in an article, but in poetry it can be an intentional choice that can be artful. And so what do you think it's like to on that side of it? What's editing poetry like?
Well, I do work with a lot of poets. I think it's important to get to know the poet's voice. And when you give feedback to a poet, you're not trying to get the poet to write like you or to write differently, but you're trying to encourage the poet to bring out their own voice, their own strengths, their own vision, and point out places where an image might help, or where something isn't clear, or where something can be expanded. It's almost like it's a door. A certain line might be a door that you want to open and walk through and see what else is there. So there's a lot of different ways to give feedback to poetry, but
Yeah.
it's mostly helping the poet develop their own voice.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any advice for people that want to become poets? Like, for instead of just writing articles, but they want to become a poet fully. Do you have any advice for them?
I think the most important thing is to read poetry. So read widely, read people who write in different styles, read people who are from different backgrounds, just, be very diverse in your reading tastes. So, and try things. I often will imitate another poet to see, is there something in this particular style that speaks to me that I can work with? But I think the most important thing is to read widely and often, and then to practice your craft. So to make a writing schedule for yourself and write on a regular basis, and then find a group or even just one other person to show who you trust to show your work to and get feedback on.
Yeah, for sure. I know that scheduling thing. So one of my majors is music here at DePaul. I'm double majoring. That's one of them. And like that scheduling thing is so important. That's the thing I realized being a freshman here. Like in high school, I would practice when I had time, but here I schedule it into my day. And at first it feels weird to be like scheduling creative time, but then after a while you're like, no, this is so helpful. Why haven't I been doing this forever? So for sure. Do you have any recommendations for writers to read, if a person wants to expand their horizons of poets that they're reading?
So, I think one really good
As
thing to
yourself, of
do
course.
is to read, thank you, is to read anthologies.
Okay.
So, so like the best poetry of the whatever year, so that you can see a lot of different styles. And then if there's somebody that really speaks to you, go out and get a whole book of theirs.
Yeah.
So because poetry is so subjective, it's really hard to say, who one should read. I mean, if you're into formal poetry, that could be one thing to read. If you're into spoken word, that could be other people to read. So I think it's really a good idea to read anthologies that have a lot of people in them, and then choose who speaks to you.
Yeah. I'll also say that, like, from my personal experience, social media has been a place I've found a lot of poets that I otherwise would not have, because people will just take little paragraphs or little sections from their poetry, people that are probably long dead at this point, and put them in, like, into big collages of poetry. And it's like a little mini anthology where you can access so many people for free. And that's just one way that social media is really expanding my horizons personally. So then, in sort of a broader way, what advice would you give to people, just young writers in general, and not just poets, but everybody?
So I think I would say basically the same thing, which is whatever genre you're writing in. So for example, if you're writing picture books, read picture books, read picture books that have been published recently, read award-winning picture books, read again widely, read books that are written in prose, books that are written in poetry, books that are written by people from different backgrounds and cultures and races and gender identities and sexualities. Really broaden your view of what can be done in a picture book. Or if you're reading fiction, the same kind of thing. So I think it's great to read in the genre that you want to write in, and then just practice, just write, just try your hand at it, and then find someone to give you feedback.
Yeah. What do you do when you experience, writer's block, or when it comes down to just writing what you feel that you can't for whatever reason?
Well, funny you should ask that question. Here, look at my mug, which says
Oh,
writer's block.
yeah, that's very cute.
I drink from writer's block every
Yeah.
day.
Where
So,
did you find that? That's wonderful.
on one of my trips, and actually on the back, you see it says ideas, and it came with a special pen. Yeah. So this is my inspiration. There's no magic cure. Just write anyway. I mean, I have notebooks of writing that starts with, I don't know what to write today. I'm a fraud, even with all these books. I have no ideas, just like really dribbling all that out, which is embarrassing. And then eventually something will kick in, or I will write an imitation of a poem, or I'll read, or I'll pick a form. Let's say, this is kind of what I think is fun. Probably a lot of other people don't, but I'll say, I don't know what to write today. Maybe I'll try a sonnet. And the form might kick something up. So it just get that pen moving. I still write with a pen and a notebook. I know a lot of people write directly on the computer. Just start. And even if you have nothing to say, and you'll surprise yourself. Something will happen. I promise you, you're not going to sit there for years with nothing to say. Something will happen.
Yeah, for sure. I love that idea of writing imitation poetry as well. I think that's like it's a nice concrete thing that you can be like, no, this is, if I'm not feeling inspired right now, this is my mission, is to write it like imitation poetry. I haven't heard that idea before, and I really, really love it.
So, you can take a poem, and you could, let's say, write a poem with the same title. You could take a poem and you can see, okay, the first line has 7 words, the second line has 3 words, and literally copy that form. And you could even do noun, verb, adjective. And it's just an exercise. It might not go anywhere, but it might just get you going. I know sometimes when I'm writing, and like I've had like 14 days where nothing has happened and I'm really frustrated, and then something breaks through on the 15th day. I needed those previous 14 days to get where that I got with the 15th day.
Oh, totally.
So nothing's wasted.
Yeah, it's not thinking of writer's block as a negative thing, I think, is somewhat of a trick. It's not necessarily. It's a process.
I've heard it called a building block.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a step in the process of doing everything. Yeah. So then, sort of switching the subject here, but can you talk about what it means for you to combine your writing and your activism? Because, combining art with activism is, personally, I'm a poli-sci music double major. Obviously, it's something I care about a lot, but I think it's something that a lot of people care about a lot, and it can put a lot more of a positive spin on politics, which people, think that they don't like. But if you do it through art, it can make it a lot more accessible. So can you talk about how you work with that?
So, back in the day, I mean, I came of age as a lesbian in the early 80s, and I still think it's true, but especially back then, even writing openly as a lesbian about LGBTQ topics was a political act. And I still think it's a political act. And art, whether it's poetry or music or any kind of art, brings us down to our common humanity. Right? We all, no matter what, we have the same feelings of joy, sorrow, anger, love, sadness, fear. And so if you can engage people in that way, even if they don't agree with you, hopefully they will see that we are all part of the human race and that we all deserve certain things like safety.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that for me, and everybody has to figure out what they're good at. Everybody's good at something. So I'm not really good at confrontation and and debating with people about politics. It's not my strength. My strength is creating art that will hopefully inspire people to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
Everybody has their strength, and everybody has the responsibility to try and make the world better. And so this is what I have chosen, or I feel like more like it's chosen me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I have felt like that many times too, of like music has chosen me. It's not something I've had a choice to pick, or activism has chosen me. I'm sure that's a very common feeling among people in like the intersection between politics and art, to be doing that, or activism and art. Yeah, for sure. For those people that don't know, you were the keynote speaker at the University of Wyoming the week that Matt was killed for their Pride Week. Could you talk about how that affected you and how that affected your process for writing Always Matt?
So, as you said, in 1998, I flew out to Denver and then was driven to Laramie on October 12th. When I got on the plane, I didn't know that Matt had died that morning. I mean, I knew what had happened to him. It was explained to me by Jim Osborne. I was given the choice whether I would still come or not. Obviously, I decided that I would go. So, I have been, I don't know if haunted is the right word, but I don't know that a day has gone by in the last 25 years where I haven't thought about Matt and thought about the fact that I was chosen by whatever you believe in, fate or whatever, to be there and to address the audience, to address his friends, to look at the empty seat in the front row where I firmly believe he would have sat, and to take on the responsibility and the obligation and the privilege of keeping his name alive, giving voice to his story. His voice was stolen. So, I can very easily transport myself back to that time and space at any given moment, because it's one of those life-changing moments that you just do not forget. I mean, I remember everything about it. I remember the woman who drove me from the airport to Laramie. I remember meeting Jim Osborne for the first time and him tying a yellow ribbon around my sleeve. I remember talking to one of Matt's teachers. I remember so much. And I've been back to Laramie a couple of times, and I've gone to where the fence stood and felt that Wyoming wind and looked back at the town. So all of that played a part in my writing the book. I just sit very still, very quietly, breathe, remember, and see what I can dig down deep and bring up in terms of language to express this experience.
Yeah, for sure. I was, when I watched your MSNBC interview, I think it was, where you talked about the empty seat, that hit me so hard to imagine speaking and all of his friends were sitting in the front row and there was an empty seat, and that emptiness, that then again, I think you mentioned earlier here that you reflected that like with these simple prose, that was, you know, that his voice was stolen, about that. So I guess this is sort of a follow-up, but what does Matt's story mean to you?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, there's just, and I think of the meaning of Matt with the title of Judy's book, of course. It just means if you know what I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little here because
Okay. It's a broad question.
it's a very broad question. It means that our world is broken, that we each have the responsibility to do what we can to fix it. It means that no matter how much good, and this is the key, I think, for me, which is no matter how much good has come out of this tragedy, and a lot of good has come out of it, the price was still way too high.
Yep.
And one, you know, in Judaism, which is my tradition, we say, when you save a life, you save a world. So, you know, the opposite of that is when you take a life, you take away a world. And we will never know, had Matt lived, what he would have done, how he would have changed the world. We
Yeah.
have no, you know, we maybe can guess, but we'll never know. And so what we have to do is make the changes in the world we think he would have liked to see. So that's what it means to me.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful way of putting it. The when you take a life, you end a world, for sure. Sort of in the same vein, you know, thinking about what we can do to change the future, what hopes and what fears do you have for our future?
Well, one can always hope for peace. I definitely always hope for peace. But what is happening right now in Israel is so heartbreaking. It's really ramped up the fear of pretty much every Jew I know, of every person I know. It's just been so horrible.
It's terrifying.
On, you know, the fighting on both sides. I mean, you know, people ask me, have I taken a side, which is just such the question. I'm on the side of anyone who believes in peace.
Yeah.
I'm on the side of anyone who does not believe in killing. So my heart is definitely broken with the events of today. And my hope is that humanity can figure out a way to live together in peace.
Yeah.
You know, I think about the children, you know, they deserve a better world from us. We haven't done a really good job, and we have to do better.
Yeah, the idea of taking a side in any context, in my opinion, is often the problem.
Yeah, because there's no winners.
Yeah.
Just losers.
Yep. Yeah. And no matter what the problem is, taking a side is often, well, it's never the solution. It's often just making the problem worse to do that. Yeah. So then over the last 25 years, a lot has changed. Like looking back on it, what things have changed positively, what things have changed negatively, and how has your view of the world changed?
Another big question.
Yes.
Well, you know, there's some obvious things that have changed, such as the passing of marriage equality. That had a huge impact on my life. You know, I have the privilege of being legally married to my spouse. We've been together for 35 years. In terms of the book world, what has changed is now there are many, many books about LGBTQ families for all ages. And when I published Heather Has Two Mommies, there were none. So that is a huge change. For a while, things seemed to be going in a very positive direction. And then the previous administration, in my opinion, unleashed an incredible amount of hatred. And so I feel like we have gone backwards, especially, you know, with all the anti-LGBTQ laws that are being proposed and being passed, and especially the laws against trans people and the violence against trans women of color. So that is very devastating, and that is unfortunately seems to be escalating. So, you know, we're we've made a lot of progress. We've taken a lot of steps backwards, and we just have a long way to go. And no matter how disheartened we get, we have to keep fighting. And we have to come together, and we have to be in coalition, and we have to think about the greater good for all human beings.
Yeah, totally. I often, I've came of age like in politics in the world where that was beginning to happen. I don't really remember observing politics before those laws started getting passed, because I think I was like about 14, and that was when those laws started happening. And so it's odd for me to imagine a world where that stuff doesn't happen. But in the same way, I think that it's almost a sign that we are making progress, that there are laws being passed against the LGBTQ plus community now, especially against our literature and our books. It's a sign that we have those literature and we have that books, and that people are aware of it, and that we're making changes.
Right. It's, there's the huge backlash, which of course a backlash always is preceded by progress.
Yes.
Otherwise there would be nothing to have a backlash against, right? So that is definitely what is happening.
Yeah, that's like always how I've thought of it. It's because of the work that we've done and the progress that we've made. And I say we, people, not me so much. I've only been in it for 4 years, but people before me.
I will include you. You're doing
a
lot of important work, but working for the foundation, it's wonderful to be active at a young age.
Yeah. And I do also want to say that the expanding of literature for LGBTQ plus people is largely thanks to you. And your book, Heather Has Two Mommies, like I mentioned at the beginning, but that was groundbreaking to have a children's book about and for LGBTQ plus families and people. So then sort of my final question that I have written down here is, what do you hope Always Matt will inspire for people and will motivate them to do?
Well, there's a couple of things. I really hope that people will be interested in Matt's story and will turn to other artistic interpretations, such as the Laramie Project, such as the film Matt Shepard is a Friend of Mine, such as Judy's book, The Meaning of Matt, such as the beautiful fusion oratorio considering Matthew Shepard, and really steep yourself in this story so that you can respond in a way that will make the world a better place, whether that can be creating your own artwork, it could be writing letters, it could be marching in the street, which we desperately need, it could be voting, please, please, please always vote.
Yes.
And it could be reaching out to someone in the LGBTQ community who you sense might be struggling and needs a little extra support. There's so many things that you can do. But it's like I said before, everybody has their own strengths, and it's up to you to figure out what is the best course of action for you to take. And there's no wrong course of action except to do nothing.
Yeah, for sure. And with the voting thing again, I'm not sure about every state. I think that they're all pretty much the same. Indiana, for sure, early voting starts this week. So early vote, register to vote. That's getting to the deadline for that in a lot of states. Voting is so important. I'm going to get to do it for the first time this year. I'm very excited. So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. That was the last question I have for you. If there's anything else that you want to follow up or to say that you want to cover, it's sort of anything you want to say about our interview or anything at all, please do.
Well, I think you did a great job. And I just want to thank the other members of the book club who sent in the questions. I could tell that people put a lot of thought into them, and I appreciate people's curiosity. And I think we pretty much covered it. We talked about the book. I might want to mention, if people aren't aware of my previous book, which I mentioned briefly, especially because we talked a lot about poetry. So October Morning, A Song for Matthew Shepard, which came out, I believe, in 2012, is a poetic exploration of the crime that took Matt from us. So it's a series of 68 poems or poetic monologues that are told from various points of view, starting with the fence speaking, because the fence, in my view, was an innocent bystander before all this happened. And there are voices given to the moon and the stars that watched over Matt, the deer that kept him company, actual people, fictitious people. But if you're interested in poetry, there's a lot of poems in form. And there are notes on every single poem that talk about where the research behind each poem, but also there's a guide to different poetic forms, like the villanelle, the pantoum, so haiku. So people might be interested in that book as well.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful that it has those explorations of and the explanations of the different poetry forms. And I will be ordering a copy of it. But that's wonderful. And that do you think of Always Matt as a follow-up to October Song, or as they're each their own standalones?
That's a really good question. I think they make a good pairing in a way because, first of all, they were written 12 years apart, but also October Morning really focuses more on the events starting with before Matt was attacked up through the trials. And Always Matt really focuses more on, as we've discussed, his life and legacy. And they're very different in terms of, Always Matt obviously is an illustrated book. So I think they're good companions. And
Yeah.
I would definitely read October Morning first.
Okay, for sure.
If you haven't read either book,
Mhm.
to read them, kind of in the order. I guess maybe it doesn't matter which order you read them
Yeah.
in, but
Yeah.
I think that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having this interview and for all of the work that you do and have done for so many years to create spaces in literature for queer people and spaces in the world for LGBTQ plus people. On behalf of everybody at Matthew's Place, we are so grateful for you and for the work that you do, and for doing this interview with us. This is such a huge thing for us. I remember when I was a writer at Matthew's Place, I attended one of these, and I watched one of these, and it was incredible to get that advice and to hear my questions read, and to a writer who I respected so much. And so for the writers to be really well respected and famous authors to be doing this for us means so much to me and means so much to all of our writers. So thank you for that.